Hello, Monsters. AdMonsters Editorial Director Gavin Dunaway here. Thank you for joining us today as we aim to tackle several persistent myths about traffic authentication with our friends at LiveRamp. While the programmatic ecosystem was built on the back of the third-party cookie, everyone's favorite text file was a flawed tool for the job forced upon it, and its demise is a chance to reset our industry to the benefit of publishers, advertisers, and consumers. But that opportunity resides within a tempest of uncertainty about what comes next. Will there be a straightforward third-party cookie replacement? Phrases like identity resolution and authenticated traffic are circling the trades. But perhaps there's a great deal of confusion over what those terms actually mean and their ramifications for the digital advertising space. Today, we'll bring clarity to your understanding of traffic authentication and identity marking by debunking some too common mythconceptions. In addition, we'll hear from buy and sell side thought leaders about how the digital advertising space is already transforming as the third-party cookie makes a slow exit. But before we get started, all of you out there in the cheap seats should know that this webinar is interactive. Note the question box in front of you. Feel free to throw a curveball our way at any time. Since we have a good deal of content to get through today, we'll probably save audience questions for the end, but you never know. Also, we'll be throwing a few polls in your direction, and which you can answer anonymously. Let's try one now. So, take a look on your screens. The poll question is, the death of the third-party tracking cookie blank is equally good news for advertisers and publishers, is going to turn the tables in publishers' favor, gives the buy side one more leg up on their supply partners, will doom us all to servitude for the walled gardens. I imagine that last one is like Downton Abbey with a lot of blazers on top of jeans. So while the audience mulls that over, let's get to know today's speakers. Jason, the AdMonsters community is always happy to hear from you, but we haven't had the pleasure of seeing you in your LiveRamp regalia. What are you doing over there now?
Thanks, Gavin. And I just have to say, you have the best voice in ad tech, hands down. Yeah. So I'm over at LiveRamp. I'm the global head of publishers, and specifically my charter is taking out to market the ATS solution for publishers, and that's connecting our advertisers, or over 400 advertisers that are leveraging the onboarding identity link solution, and connecting those advertisers' budgets to publishers to help when the cookies are gone. But it's not just a web issue. We look at this as an omnichannel kind of cross-platform issue.
And we'll hear a lot more about that coming up shortly. But next, let's hear from Chris. It's a pleasure to have you chatting with the crew again. What are you focusing on at News Corp these days?
Oh, let's see. Well, we're pretty busy. We're not reporting on the end of Western civilization as we know it. I think the company's been really taking a deep look at our ad stack, our commercial data gathering efforts, and just working in a more collective manner across across all the different business units. We have some great properties like Dow Jones and New York Post, and obviously some great people there. And so a lot of interesting things going on.
Well, and yes, we do hear about them. Excited to hear more about it a little later. And last but not least, another familiar face in a newish role. Jeremy, Global Head of Ecosystem. That is a hell of a title, but what does that role entail?
Thanks, Gavin. Excited to be here today. I first and foremost have to concur with Jason. You have the most amazing webinar voices I've ever heard. So, if the next hour just listening to you talk. All right, so Global Head of Ecosystem at MediaMath. I think as most of you know, we all sort of live in a partner-based world these days, and MediaMath is very much driven by our partnerships on the media side, on the data side, and on the technology side. And so my role is to oversee all media, data, and technology partnerships, and many of the strategic initiatives for the company. And so spending a lot of time on Source, which we'll get into, which we announced in the fall around building a accountable, addressable, and aligned supply chain. Spending a lot of time on CTV and our expansion there, and last but certainly not least, addressability, which is one of our big priorities for the business.
Cool.
Yeah, it is.
I cannot wait to. I can't. Wait
and by the way, Gavin, if it makes you feel any better, my mom always said I had a great face for radio, so I don't know what she meant, but.
I'll tell you when you're older.
Okay.
So man, the poll questions, very interesting. We had 29% think that the death of the third-party tracking cookie is equally good news for advertisers and publishers. 35% thinks it's going to turn the tables in publishers' favor, but 29% also think it's going to doom us to servitude to the walled gardens. I'm curious. I'm curious if we're going to think the same after this presentation. So I'm going to hand the controls over to Jason now. I can't wait to hear more about authentication. Let's get debunking those myths.
Excited to. Thanks, Gavin. So our agenda here is we're going to talk about how we got here, some of those mythconceptions that Gavin spoke to, how we're going to build a trusted ecosystem together to kind of get to some of those poll questions, and highlight the opportunity for publishers, and then we'll get to the panel Q&A. So first, how we got here. But let's first take a look at that. It's easy to say that the regulators and the browser changes have led us to where we are. The reality is the issue started upstream of that. We as an industry lost trust of the consumers. We weren't transparent on how the data was being used, and there are myriad anecdotes of, retargeting issues, continue to retarget users, don't put frequency caps on, third-party data leakage. So regulators acted on behalf of consumers. GDPR kicked off privacy regulations, which forced companies to change how they were handling consumer data. Since then, more regulatory bodies have followed suit, such as CCPA, which we've all been painfully aware of over the past year, and some change, particularly on the publisher side. And browsers started with the Safari Intelligent Tracking Prevention Program, beginning to restrict the data and the use of cookies for cross-site tracking. The most recent Google announcement says that within February 2022, the third-party cookie will go away. So when we look at that, cookies are a crumbling foundation. We know that that's been the case for quite a while. They're not transparent. Consumers have had little insight into how their data is being used, how their data is being collected. They're people-based. They represent a device, not a person. They're not interoperable, so it doesn't go cross-platform. It's only a web solution. It doesn't go across app. Advertisers can't measure that across CTV. And it's not persistent. So as we look to build a new ecosystem, we believe we need to fundamentally change that ecosystem and put consumers in control of the data. We are working to build an ecosystem built on trusted value of exchange of content or services in exchange for data, email address. This is, straightforward, and some of the publishers, we've got Chris here on the News Corp side, they're no stranger to this value exchange. Other publishers out there that you've seen, including the walled gardens. Consumers have been giving their email address for access to free content for quite some time. We see this value exchange as only increasing. This new ecosystem brings both publishers and the marketers closer to the consumer and also closer to each other. So it's a win-win-win for all three parties. So we're taking the first step towards building a new ecosystem. We have been embedding identity link across the ecosystem to enable marketers to target one-to-one at scale and accurately attribute that to all of their media investments. We see our efforts over the past 3 years as first steps towards building a new ecosystem. This hasn't been anything that has been done overnight. We have been connecting identity link and authenticated traffic solutions to platforms, the SSPs, the DSPs. We have over 30 DSPs active on ATS. We have over 15 SSPs, 5 of the top 6 SSPs in the marketplace bidding and sending identity links, leveraging ATS. And so for advertisers, they are able to measure this finally cross-platform with outcome, leveraging identity link. So let's look at our first myth.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but could I just ask a question there? Identity link, plenty of people in the audience, have heard the term and perhaps even some use it right now. But do you have like kind of how do you explain identity link in a nutshell? Is there a good analogy you guys like to use?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we think of LiveRamp as a connector. So across the ecosystem, and it's heavily started with the advertisers, decade-plus experience of working with the top 400 advertisers to onboard their data, offline transactional data. We've been able to build an identity graph for all of those advertisers where they have used us for enhanced targeting and enhanced measurement across platform. So effectively, advertisers are already leveraging it today. When the cookie goes away, our aim is to bring the advertisers using Identity Link and connecting data using Identity Link for their first party, connected to consumers who are providing that trusted, privacy-first authentication with publishers that are enabled with Identity Link through our authenticated traffic solution, which we'll get into shortly. I'll unpack some more of the details in terms of how that works.
Cool. Is
that helpful?
Oh, I think so. And hey, I'm intrigued. I want to know more.
Great. Well, let's get into the myths. This will be helpful for a lot of folks. It's the kind of keynote of our topic here. Myth number one: I have a small percentage of authenticated traffic. It isn't meaningful to me from a revenue perspective. The interesting thing here is that most publishers are, and this is our charter, and this is what we're responsible for, taking the authenticated traffic solution opportunity out to market, bringing more of those advertiser budgets that are leveraging Identity Link to publishers. And advertisers, when they're able to target on a verified identity, these are budgets that they've been spending $10, $15 in CPMs in terms of the Facebook walled gardens of the world over the past 5 to 8 years. These are known practices. These advertisers want to be able to do this omni-channel. And so the CPMs that we're seeing on average right now are 22% higher than a Chrome CPM, but we're also seeing CPMs 3 to 4 times that as those budgets come on board with some of our top advertisers. And then when you look at it from a publisher monetization perspective, Google published a study a quarter or so ago when they, in and around the time when Chrome announced the death of the third-party cookie, that CPMs are 52% lower for browsers that do not have the cookie or impressions that are cookieless. And we're seeing that actually, and there's probably some recent COVID stuff here, but we're seeing them lower than that. And a lot of publishers are. So what we're working on right now is, let's say you have $1 of cookieless, and this is just for example, CPMs versus a $3 CPM in Chrome. Wouldn't you like to trade a $3.60 or a $5 CPM for that dollar? And more and more as we get into the market with ATS, every publisher is saying unequivocally yes. Myth number two: available identity solutions aren't secure. This was kind of a myth that we started to hear after the IAB annual leadership meeting with REARC. There's a lot of banter out there about hashed emails being passed throughout the ecosystem. Now, this is something we all need to be aware of. This is something that cannot be. At LiveRamp, we are authenticated traffic solution is a non-PII based solution. We do not store PII. We do not pass PII, and we'll get into some of the function of that later in terms of how that works. So definitely for the publishers out there and advertisers that are working with an identity-based solution, make sure that this isn't something that isn't secure and isn't putting the consumer in a privacy-first sort of way. But we'll get into how LiveRamp takes a look at that shortly. Myth number 3, there are other solutions that solve for the advertiser's core use cases. So some of the topic du jour out there in terms of what happens when the cookie goes away, we're talking about identity and authentication strategies. But there's also been talk about, the Google Sandbox and GitHub and Flock and some of those items. Now, the thing to think about when you're looking at a replacement of a cookie is some of the stuff that we talked about earlier in terms of the core marketing capabilities that a marketer, that an advertiser needs to do. A marketer advertiser needs to do audience activation and retargeting. They need frequency capping and suppression. They need media attribution. They need audience insights and segmentation. And publishers need to do site personalization as well as advertisers. All of these things break when the cookie goes away. So the thing to think about when you're talking to identity-based solution providers out there is, are they able to solve for those use cases? Are they able to now enable advertisers to do all of those use cases as well as publishers? And from an identity link perspective, ours is built to do just that. So we'll get into the opportunity for publishers and marketers shortly, but as promised, we want to show and unpack how ATS works. So LiveRamp works with a publisher. This is a web example. We can work with apps. We work with CTV. We're omnichannel. By putting our code on our page and captures PII, looking at corresponding identity links. We do a lookup based on a user who comes and logs in. We got this John Smith at email.com example. ATS is able to pick up that PII, and they're able to do a lookup in our offline Abilitech database, where we have an encrypted, hashed envelope where we provide that into the user's first-party cookie. That is stored in the user's first-party cookie, and again, the PII is deleted. It was hashed and encrypted. We never store it in our databases. We never pass it to any third party whatsoever. Only the envelope, the encrypted ID, is put into the user's first-party cookie. Next, we send those to SSPs. We talked about the train tracks that we've been building over the past 3 years with the partners, trusted partners within the authenticated traffic solution ecosystem that have integrated our ATS solution we call Sidecar. This enables the SSP to read the first-party cookie envelope, and they say, oh, there's an envelope there. I should give LiveRamp a call. They call our APIs, and we return an identity link specific for that SSP, which will be different from OpenX as an example, from Rubicon, from Verizon, Xandr, and so on and so forth. Then that identity link is sent to the DSPs that we have integrated with as well, as mentioned earlier. And those DSPs have the advertiser campaigns that are targeted with the campaigns within their ad server, leveraging identity link, their own identity link. So end to end, we are bringing the publisher's IDs through identity link and ATS to the advertiser's IDs that are targeting via identity link. So this is a great opportunity for publishers. They finally get to redefine the value exchange for their content and get those first-party authentication events. The higher they get those events, the more revenue they're going to make. Finally, kind of in control, particularly on the data side, as they haven't been in the past. They're going to leverage authenticated traffic solution to identify visitors and enable addressability without third-party cookies. They're going to actively manage reader consent and preferences for an improved user experience, a win-win. It's an opportunity for marketers. You know, marketers for the longest time haven't been able to have done the upfronts for the past 7 years at CBS. One of the big things that all the chief investment officers always want to do is the following. They want global frequency capping. They want to target that cross-platform. They want to be able to measure cross-platform so they can manage against duplication and get true incremental reach. Haven't been able to do that before, they will now. So this just underscores what we've been talking about, delivering more effective investments Again, privacy first, security, providing the consumers with greater transparency and choice of what goes on with their data, giving that precision at scale, ensures the ability to target one-to-one cross-platform and improved attribution, but more important, increased cost savings. From an advertiser side, they don't want to hit the same user over and over again. That creates waste. And just to be clear, we're not talking about cost savings at the sacrifice of the publisher's CPMs, just to be clear.
Jason, real quick, I had a few questions here.
Yeah.
I've been hearing for years that publisher first-party data is the most valuable stuff on the internet. So with the third-party cookie dying, why is my first-party data suddenly not enough to draw in advertisers?
Well, it's a great question, Gavin. I think for the quick answer to that is it depends on scale. It's always going to come down to scale. I think advertisers, agencies, and publishers are used to doing private marketplaces, programmatic guaranteed, audience-based programmatic guaranteed buys are on the rise. We've developed a product called Safe Haven, Data Safe Haven. It's kind of like a clean room. Clean rooms are, becoming a soup du jour where an advertiser can put their data in with a publisher's data. They can make a milkshake and create a campaign. That will always be the case. Publishers that have scale, like Chris Gunther and the News Corps of the world, those are going to be the ones that are still going to be hugely valuable in terms of first-party segments, and that it is relevant. But when you're talking about kind of the longer tail, that's going to be done and bought through platforms just as it has been today with the cookie, but just in a more precision, laser-based way because they're buying identity and it's more valuable.
And I've got another one for you real quick. A lot of the potential third-party cookie replacements, like unified IDs, they seem tied to browsers when publishers and advertisers alike, they're interested in new frontiers, say connected TV. Is that the case for IDL?
Yes, IDL is a omnichannel-based identifier. So we work with, and it's activated, as we talked about, on the publisher side by ATS. So we're not only helping solve the near-term problem with Safari Firefox, because we already see this as a problem. 40% of your publisher's impressions, they're painfully aware of this, as we mentioned earlier, are cookieless. So we're solving that right now in terms of kind of the triage mode. But we are targeting campaigns cross-platform. We are working with an app. Identity Link works with an app. Our graph is supported there. Both advertisers and publishers are leveraging that, and it's enabled by ATS, as well as CTV. Again, to go back and deliver on what that chief investment officer's ideal goals are.
And one more, we had a really good question come in from Michael from Go Noodle. Can ATS work compliantly for kids publishers that are subject to COPPA?
Yeah, so we talked about earlier, Identity Link is a privacy-first, people-based ID. Everything that has been able to be done with a cookie is going to be far superior with a people-based identifier. We have opt-outs, global opt-outs with every single one of our publishers, and respect every single privacy rule that's in place today.
Excellent. You may continue.
Yeah, you bet. Great question. And by the way, great company name.
I like that too.
Okay, I do. I'll have to follow up afterwards and find out what they do. But thanks for asking the question. Case study here. We've worked with the Goodway Group. I won't go through all of the details here, but just kind of focus on the results. By leveraging Identity Link and just Identity Link in terms of managing their campaigns, they were able to get a 3 times higher unique reach on their matched audiences. That was a 10 times higher win rate, resulted in them getting 185% increased reach on desktop. And this is just a use case for case study for desktop. However, very meaningful for Goodway. And that's going to conclude our presentation on authenticated traffic solutions and the trusted ecosystem. We'll turn it over to you, Gavin, for the panel.
Thank you. And hey, it's great to Great to talk to Chris and Jeremy. Very curious about their thoughts. And why don't we start off with, guys, in what ways have you noticed that identity solutions have been advantageous for you?
Sure. Want me to jump in on this? This is Chris.
Yeah.
Do it.
You know, I have to say, like, I think it's really at this point, it's about the promise and the opportunity. I think what it can mean around helping with campaign performance for our clients, for targeting. You know, I think drop in on-site latency. I think things we've sort of discussed, but I think it's early stages. And I think that, so, you know, we talk about the advantages, it's sort of what the hoped for advantages are, and I think it makes sense. But yeah, I think there's solutions are just emerging, which is great. I think you're seeing a lot of sort of ferment and innovation in the industry to deal with sort of the pending or the existing issues we have. But at this stage, like, I wouldn't necessarily say that we're seeing that direct result, or even our clients are seeing it just fully yet, but at least even within our group of properties. But I'm sure over time we'll start seeing that in aggregate, we can see some of these results.
Hey, Gavin, mind if I jump in here too?
I'd love to. I'd love to hear it.
Jeremy? Go ahead.
All right. So I mentioned this at the beginning of the intros. You know, we launched. Maybe I can give a little perspective on how MediaMaster looks at the overall landscape and then specifically addressability. So we launched Source in the fall, which is really around this focus of building a new platform for a redesigned digital ecosystem. You know, what we hear from our clients is that, you know, each advertising dollar needs to stretch a lot further. And so there's this ton of focus on maximizing spend. And especially right now with COVID, you know, all businesses have had to turn almost 100% digital overnight. And so, you know, they all look at quote unquote addressable advertising as the answer, right? And there's more options than ever between CTV, digital out of home, audio, video, mobile, you name it. You know, but the real issue is we've sort of put brands in a tough spot. They have basically two bad options. They have on the one side a scaled solution with walled gardens. But in those instances, you have creating of your own homework, withholding data, you know, high take rates, and publishers sort of don't benefit from that. And on the other side, you have this sort of open ecosystem, which is filled with innovation, but it's super complex and wasteful. It's hard to measure. There's a lot of data loss. And it's just overall too much complexity. And so we didn't necessarily set out for this. It was sort of an evolution, right, from an ecosystem perspective, but here's where we are. And so from our perspective, there's sort of three ways to solve that. Is you need to sort of like refocus your efforts on, from our perspective, three principles of accountability, addressability, and alignment. So addressability is really core to our focus going forward about how to solve the media supply chain and bring publishers and brands closer together with tech sort of as the enabler. Because what addressable solutions and what you just heard from Jason offer is this ability to have true omni-channel reach, focusing more on consumers rather than on devices, which from our perspective creates significantly better opportunities for brands to put quality messages in front of their customers, and for publishers to have, to what Jason said earlier, this idea of finally having true value exchange at the same level as the walled gardens. And so, you know, our focus has been to build infrastructure to support great partners like LiveRamp, so that brands can sort of view consumers as people, not as devices, not have data loss, and really create end-to-end connections with publishers to drive better outcomes, and on the publisher side, better monetization capabilities.
And I think
That's great.
there's another part.
Gavin, real quick, one thing that I wanted to add and just piggyback on that, if you don't mind, is from our perspective, and going back on Gunther's point earlier, Chris Gunther's point earlier.
I don't mind being called Gunther.
Okay. I just wanted everybody to know. Yeah, I mean, to the early innings point, it is. So just to kind of quantify that, if I may, when we talked about those top 400 advertisers that are leveraging identity link, targeting as identity link, measuring identity link for attribution purposes, and have been for a while, our effort is to get them migrated over within the next year, bidding on identity link. So we've got our top 30 advertisers already today doing that. And, kind of going back on the first myth that we talked about in terms of, quantifying the opportunity and publishers, not knowing if they have enough authentication. And we talked about the CPM trade-off and just how much more valuable those authenticated users are for advertisers. We're starting to see a lot of traction in terms of, again, those top 30 advertisers of the 400. Those 400 are spending $3.5 billion a year digitally. So when that's moved over, that's going to be hugely meaningful for publishers, and we're finally going to reverse the trends that we've been seeing year over year over year. 55% go to the walled garden, 60% go to the walled garden, 65, 70 is where we're nearly at. We're going to start reversing those trends. Sorry.
Interesting. A lot of cool stuff there. And I think, kind of piggybacking on what Jeremy was saying. I mean, that a lot of it's, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jeremy, it's about the control that and kind of freedom that is offered by the open ecosystem. That's what your clients desire, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, brands want to connect to consumers on quality content that consumers trust, like Wall Street Journal, like the New York Times, like weather. The issue has been it's overly complex, and so you have to find ways to simplify that and make it easier for brands to use the identity solution that they want, which our infrastructure supports. So, for example, our infrastructure supports IDL, and it's meant to be extensible so that you can support multiple identities at any one point in time. This way, brands don't want to rent their customers back from technology companies, right? They want to choose. They want to proactively be able to say, I want to use LiveRamp for these reasons. And so that's a way of simplifying the ecosystem when companies like LiveRamp, companies like MediaMath can come together and create a more seamless approach that will ultimately benefit consumers and provide more value to publishers.
And also to jump to Jason, and this is something I hear from a lot of publishers. Their amount of authenticated traffic it's not something that they go showing off at parties. Even 47% in our survey said it's pretty low. And I guess there's the question coming from a lot of angles is that do they have to authenticate traffic? Is that the best way to go, or are there other options?
Yeah, it's a great question, and one we hear quite often. And the reality is, the publishers, going back on the myth that we were talking about earlier, they have more than they know. So there's authentication that happens on most publisher sites. A lot of it is, in the form of newsletter signups. Some of it is in the form of, hey, get this white paper and sign in order to get that white paper. The other thing that quite a few publishers don't know, because they can't really measure it, is the amount of traffic that's coming from their newsletters. They've been sending newsletters with their consumers for years. Some sites have huge amount of subscriber lists. And those have emails associated with them when they come into the site for personalization purposes. And ATS enables that as well when we turn that into an identity link. And then the reality is, again, most publishers are in the 5 to 10% range in terms of authenticated users, or their inventory is quote unquote addressable. You don't need to take that further than 15, 20% in order to offset the risk of the complete annihilation of the cookie, again, because that CPM trade-off is so much greater.
Interesting. I think that's well put. Actually, can we jump to your case study real quick? You mentioned that there was a 10 times higher win rate. And one of the questions that came in from the audience was, is there anything in particular you attribute that win rate to?
Yeah, it's all about, so here's another, we could have put 10 myths in this deck, but we didn't, because we don't want to do death by PowerPoint. Nobody wants that. But the reality is, when I was on the publisher side at CBS, we only saw like 25% match rate on the cookie. And that's kind of a misconception as well, that a lot of publishers think, and advertisers think, advertisers probably know better because they actually have more optics into this through platforms like MediaMath with Jeremy and their client base. But there's a shrinking amount of matched impressions when you go from DMP, ad server, DSP, this third party, that third party that takes bytes out in between. We've all seen those studies that $1 turns into 42 cents on the publisher side. That's not just chunks that are coming out from a CPM perspective. Those are impressions that are coming out too. And so by the time it gets past the SSP to the publisher site, you're talking about a 25% match rate on cookies, right? So when you remove that and you talk about matching people-based, IDL to IDL, there's no syncing anymore, and there's a true one-to-one match. So you're finding more needles in the haystack, which is what this game is all about in programmatic.
Hey, Gavin. Maybe I can step in. It's Jeremy.
Oh, please.
Yeah. So I think the last thing that Jason said is something that I noticed in the polls. Like, there's a lot of people that really just want to learn more about how this all works. And I think what Jason said at the very end, which is like match rate. So that's really what a lot of this comes down to, and removing data loss. So right now what happens is a marketer has a customer pool that they want to target against. Matching those audiences to another disparate ID set creates loss. And so if a marketer has 100 customer files, what ends up happening is by the time it gets to a DSP, which is pretty high up the funnel for the food chain, there's already a 20 to 40% loss. So you're sort of already losing a lot of customers along the way. And then matching those to audience targeting, which has other sort of disparate ID solution than what the SSP is using, and all the way down to the publisher. To Jason's point, you're only getting about 25%, maybe a little bit more depending on the client type, targeting. And so when you think about having the right addressability solution, what you want is you want to have the highest levels of find rate. So this is like the ability to reach as many customers as you possibly can, You want it to be, to some extent, deterministic, right? So it's really based on true deterministic connections with consumers.
User,
Exactly.
not a device.
Exactly. And you can you can add probabilistic linking to that, but you really want it. If you want it to be a person.
I'm not getting the high heel shoe ads for my wife. I'm getting the stuff that should be targeted to me.
Exactly. And then you, right. So you want to really the higher match rates of extending reach, improving frequency, and sequential messaging. I think this notion of omni-channel reach, frequency, and messaging is missing, and focusing on people-based allows you to do that. And then you want to be able to measure. These are things that the walled gardens do, but it's not. But you have brands. You have brands sort of feeling like they're renting their customers, and there's homework rating going on. Whereas this approach with IDL and really focusing on consumers really is a true counterweight, and will bring a lot more value to brands. And in return, it will bring more value to along the way.
Interesting. Now, that also kind of gets into another piece of interesting territory that somebody brought in one of the questions, kind of asking about how do anyone in the ecosystem think about preserving privacy while still providing the promise of authenticated traffic and the advertiser insight and measurement that goes there. I guess to simplify it, I mean, why is identity more or less friendly for user privacy than previous than our third-party cookies of yore?
Yeah, I can. I'll take that one, and then maybe hand over to Chris. I mean, when we work with our publishers, and look, publishers have been working around the clock over the past 2 years. I mean, it's consumed with privacy regulation. It's consumed legal cues. Chris can probably shed a lot more insight into that, and I'll shut up in a second. But the net of it is, before we work with anyone, whether it be on the advertiser side, but again, the eyeballs here from a connectivity perspective on a publisher side, there is an audit that goes into place from a privacy perspective. When we talk about building a trusted ecosystem, it's not just swapping out a cookie for another ID and saying, hey, we did it. Let us go back to grading our own homework here. We're fine. Nothing to see here. All is well. It's more than that. It's making sure that every solution that we work with across the ecosystem has the right privacy policy. There's privacy policy audits. They're updating those on a regular basis. We have our people-based opt-out that's provided there, compliant on those privacy sides with CCPA, GDPR. So that's at the cornerstone of what we do in terms of like building that trusted ecosystem with ATS. But I'll turn it over to Chris.
This is Chris. It's interesting. I think that it used to be when you negotiate a contract with a vendor, the most amount of time you would spend was on the commercial terms. Now I think that it's replaced by the negotiation on sort of the privacy components of a contract. I think first of all, one way of looking at it is that could it get any worse, right, than it is right now? I mean, we're working in an ecosystem that's obviously rapidly changing and dissolving, that was never designed with privacy in mind. And I think that's a critical thing to think about. And obviously there's sort of, the cookie is also, there's sort of some level of anonymity with it, but it was being used in so many different purposes, so many different ways that, I mean, it just could never be re-engineered to be privacy centric. And I think what you're seeing right now in the industry with the approach to the new solutions and, whether it be the work that LiveRamp is doing or others are doing, I think a lot of it is simple as, there's sort of a privacy first focus on it. And I am spending a tremendous, as a publisher, I think all publishers, we have to keep that in mind. Like whoever we're going to work with, whatever technologies we're going to work with, however we're approaching the experience on our site, it is about with privacy in mind. And it's not just because of the regulatory environments. Obviously, that's a big catalyst to make sure that we're in compliance with GDPR or CCPA or whatever other state by state acronym you have for these regulations. But it's also so we have to do that. But it is also a matter of like we have a appreciation of our relationship with our user. They're coming to our site, so we have a responsibility there to make sure that it's their privacy first. And so I think that thinking, that thought feeds itself out into everything else in the vendors we work with and the identity solutions we work with.
Amen.
So, Chris, I want to stick with you just for a second. As the publisher representative here, I mean, what other pitfalls do you see that are kind of on the way to the cookieless future? What's got you maybe not worried, but apprehensive?
How much time do we have? No, it's a listen. There is so much. I think Jason at the beginning during the slides mentioned about other areas where the cookie plays a part beyond just around identity. Where it kind of underpins certain components of whether it be from content recommendation, sign in. I mean, obviously it feeds into, we were just talking about industry, regulation or regulations and where the consent signals and things like that. A lot of these things are based around the cookie or built around the cookie. And so that going away is going to break a lot of different things. And I think so that obviously is a worry. I think, what sort of makes it more optimistic, or like it's being used for things it wasn't designed for, as we all know. And so, yes, we're going through this period of disruption and transition, but hopefully we'll end up with a cleaner infrastructure that will actually put itself in, not have these same kind of pitfalls that we're seeing right now.
Yeah, I think you said it earlier, Chris. Like it can only get, like we're not going to get worse. Like it can only get better, and I think everybody's committed to doing that. No, sorry, this is Jason, LiveRamp.
Well, I've got an interesting one. There's been a lot of chat here that we were kind of circling around this idea of how to save the open programmatic ecosystem. We've chatted a lot at AdMonsters conferences about how the ecosystem kind of getting squeezed by the walled gardens, and there's a lot of fears, and you saw it in that survey, that the walled gardens will dominate with the death of the cookie. I mean, so let me put it to all of you. I mean, what else is key to preserving this open programmatic system?
I'll start here, and I think I'd kind of gotten onto this one earlier when we talked about that percent of the the 3.5 billion that our top 400 advertisers are spending in the ecosystem, moving that away from the walled gardens. We talked about those percentages, and we're around 68% today, and kind of moving those back. Make no mistake, the walled gardens of the world don't want to see a global identifier, omnichannel identifier. That makes them squeamish. The walled gardens have control within their individual wall. And they've done well, to Jeremy's point. They've been able to nail identity. They've been able to nail measurement, but they've been grading their own homework. And we're going into a future where now the publisher, consumer, and the marketer are in control. It doesn't matter what the walled garden is, because the walled garden has their strength in their individual platform. Web, that's a strong area for Chrome. We all know that. We're talking about that right now. Some of the other browsers. But then there's app, and then there's CTV. There's a whole suite of other quote-unquote walled gardens across CTV. So when we're talking about bringing identity and enabling publishers to kind of create that value exchange and build a trusted ecosystem where now the consumer is providing their personal information in a trusted, compliant, transparent way where they feel that they're in charge, that's just going to build a better overall ecosystem for everyone.
This is Chris, and I think someone referenced earlier about the ISBA report. I think that obviously going on right now is the identity, the transition with identity is critical. I think Jason laid out some points why that would be beneficial, but there's obviously a lot of other problems and lack of transparency within the current open auction environment. And I think that those things have to be kept in mind too. While we're solving one area over here, what we're discussing today, these other areas, again, laid out for people who have time, the 90 pages, the report or the exec summary, where there's so many different steps, there's so many pieces that are broken, there's so much opportunity for loss, for spend to disappear, that 15% everyone's been talking about. And just the data, like the understanding, like there's the lack of alignment on the data collected, that is shared, naming conventions, all these things that make it an ecosystem even more broken. And I think that we need to fix those things as well. There needs to be more, and as a publisher, we've actually been, for the last couple of years, been really focused on, with our partners, SSP partners, access to the log level data. But it's a challenge even once you get it, because it's different. How everyone approaches it is different across each SSP. So you have a level of work, not just for the ingestion, but then the aggregation. So I think things like that have to be cleaned up and improved and put in better standards. And I think so that will then further help the confidence on the buy side to remain in the open ecosystem.
Yeah. So we got another. Oh, I'm sorry. Did somebody else want to jump in on that?
No, I just said yep.
Okay.
Amen.
So got a good one. A big part of this is about the number of buyers who are going to jump in to push the scale. So what advice would you give to a brand to try out IDL, perhaps if they are apprehensive about it?
Yeah, I'll take this, and maybe Jeremy, if you want to kind of tag team this one together. The way that we look at it and the conversations that we're having is we're pulling dollars from the walled gardens. These are areas that, going back on what Jeremy was talking about, what I underscored, they're already targeting on identity today within those individual walled gardens. And the response that we're seeing so far is the brands are leaning in. They want this. There has been for years, hypotheses that, hey, wouldn't it be great to have identity at scale on premium content and not some social feed? And I bet that performs at a way better clip. We're already seeing that, as is evidenced in some of the case studies, and we're just going to see more of that. So that's kind of our take on it. Jeremy, you want to tackle some of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think from my perspective, any brand that is looking to reach their customer base and doesn't want to rent their customers back from somebody else now has a really great solution in order to reach the most possible customers and drive the best possible outcomes that they can on high quality content, which they've wanted to do for some time. And so I'd be surprised if there's apprehension. I think the key is to make it as easy as possible, right? And so, when Chris talks about transparency and ISBA, and Jason talks about IDL, I think it's sort of where I went back to on why we launched Source and why that's the key priority for the business, which is to bring accountability, transparency, and better addressability infrastructure to the ecosystem, so that it's easier to buy than a walled garden.
Huh. I like that. I like that answer a lot. So to jump back to the publisher side, we got an interesting one in here from the crowd. We've been chatting a lot about the email addresses required for authentication. Is there other information that can be used to authenticate a user?
Yeah, I mean, you can do it from email. You can do it by mobile. Those are kind of or phone number. Those are kind of the big anchors from our perspective that get a majority of it.
Yeah, you need a real durable ID is the term I've heard. It's pretty popular.
Yeah. That's
Yeah,
right.
something very strong. Cool. So, we're running up to the close of time here. I think I'm gonna kind of wrap things up with a question to all of you. What advice would you give publishers who don't quite know where to begin? They're still wrapping their heads around the machinations of identity, but they kind of need a little more guidance.
I'll turn it to Gunther. I'll go last. Jason White.
Yeah, this is Chris. I think for anyone who's just starting, this theoretical publisher who's just starting to focus on this, they're both a little bit late to start, but yet not really having missed much at all. Listen, I think that the thing to do as a publisher, us as a publisher, is there's sort of two areas to focus on. One, of course, I think is lean into the industry. I think one problem we've had as publishers collectively, I don't think our voices haven't been heard as much. I think in industry groups, associations, things like that. And I think that's starting to change. And I think there's a lot of very strong voices coming from the publisher side. And what's going on with the end of third-party cookie has kind of further been a catalyst for that. So I always encourage every publisher to not to stand toe to toe to the ad tech ecosystem or members of the ad tech ecosystem, and make sure that our needs and our voices are heard. So that's why and that's choose whatever industry association you want to be part of. There's a number of them out there, but I think that's critical. Just get involved and really force the needs of the publishers. I think that the other thing too, where to begin is how are you working with your users? We have a diverse portfolio of sites. We obviously have some subscription sites. We have others who are more just sort of open, free and open. But it's still like, as we think through the product, right, and everything is, what are they coming for? They're coming for their content. They're coming for utility. And I think this is further sort of driven us as we think about the site experience, for people to provide their email address. Like, I don't believe that in the idea of just sort of slapping on some sort of registration wall without changing, to something that existed already. This is a personal opinion, not versus like a official News Corp position. But I think that as we think through going forward, like, how do we continue to offer as much utility to our users so they want to share, they want to log in, they want to authenticate, they want to share their information with us. I think this is an area where the walled gardens obviously have been fantastic. They build things that offer utility so people don't mind. They feel it's like a virtuous cycle. And I think publishers historically, and I'll say it's in a collective matter, haven't done that as well. Put the content out there and that's enough, or put a tool out there and that's enough. And so I think that we just have to rethink and how we approach the utility we offer to our users and incentivize them to register.
Well, it's interesting that that the whole newsletter trend has just like popped up like right around now when publishers could use emails more than ever. I mean, it's actually really, really serendipitous.
Well, it's interesting. Like, it's something I remember back at when I was at Condé Nast years ago. Some folks on the analytics side, that was something they'd realized, and like, those are the most newsletters are the most engaged users. The amount of time they come back, and so. I think for a number of publishers, it's been for years really driving that. But yeah, it seems like even more so these days has come to the forefront, which is it's good.
Move over to Jeremy. The closing thoughts. What are you going to tell those people on the supply side?
So for the past 10 years of programmatic, I think what technology companies have done is they've written the requirements for brands and publishers, and it's time to flip it. It's time to simplify the ecosystem, simplify the supply chain, bring brands and publishers closer together with tech as the enabler, and solve some of the biggest issues, which are radical transparency, better addressability, and aligned interests, so that the overall digital ecosystem can work more effectively and bring more value ultimately to consumers. And that's what we're doing at MediaMath every day with bringing Source to market.
Great. Guys, thanks. This has been hugely valuable. I hope the folks at home are getting value from it. I'll just wrap it up by saying I kind of look at it as like the Star Wars trilogy. The first chapter of this was, powered by the cookie, and we had the evolution of the networks, and then RTB, and that brought on more demand, and you were able to do great things from an audience targeting perspective, and then header bidding, and then it got to be like Empire Strikes Back with like GDPR and a lot of the regulations, and that foundation started to crumble, and more share went to the walled gardens. That's simple. An abnormal amount is going to the walled gardens. Well, now this is like Return of the Jedi time. Like, we're rebuilding an ecosystem, and there's going to be that value exchange that publishers, to Chris's point earlier, are going to be able to surface for users to build that relationship that they never had before. And when you think about that, when you put the consumer first, we were doing this a year ago over at CBS, you start to come up with authentication strategies, and that becomes like a driving force. There are widgets out there, just kind of anecdotally, AFC championships next Sunday. Put this reminder in your calendar, and we'll chock it full of all of the data on this team versus that team, and we'll give you reminders, days in advance, and things that you should know for the game, stuff like that. And you offer up your email address in order to get that dropped into your mobile phone calendar. You start to, the paradigm starts to shift, and it's tectonic, shifts. But consumers absolutely will provide their information for that value exchange if that value exchange is there. So completely agree, and we're working with publishers on that. And most important, it's the dollars. Being able to have identity-based campaigns using verified identity and authentication and bringing those groups together. That's what we're focused on, and it's a good time to be a publisher, and we're committed to bringing all of that strong demand to the publishers.
Great, I like that a lot. Well, we could probably talk about this for several more hours, even though I'm amazed at you guys' stamina for chatting so long. But I think it's about time to wrap things up. I want to thank Jason, Jeremy, and Chris for all the insights shared here today, and give thanks for the audience for such great questions and for sharing all your experiences. Sorry I couldn't get to every question, but we will be sending out a follow-up email where we'll have emails to LiveRamp, and you can potentially send in more questions. We can get more of a dialogue going. There will be a video replay of this webinar available, and hopefully we can also share the presentation. Might have to be cleaned up a little bit. Look for an email to me, and don't be a stranger on AdMonsters.com. We're on all the socials as well, and we hope to catch you at the next AdMonster Shindig. So long for now.